broadcasting live from South Lake Tahoe, California, the reading capital of the world. We're on a mission to make reading fun and achievable for all. Each week, we read no more than 99 pages of a book, and we live stream a discussion with awesome panelists and Q&A right here. Even if you can't squeeze in the reading, that's okay. You got 99 problems, reading ain't one. If you enjoy the conversation, please hit subscribe below. Every vote of support counts. Please also consider following us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at 99 Pages Club. All right, so now we are on our number 2 session here on Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And, you know, this is going to be, we came back after our last session and my inbox just got pummeled with Q&A. Like Cal, I mean, I don't know what it was. It's a captivating story, right? About, you know, the nature of what brings people together. I mean, and so I think what we're going to do today, we're going to keep it really simple. We're going to go through a lot of the Q&A because there's a lot of reactions to this book, a lot of reactions to Veterans Day. And, you know, even though we're talking about veterans, we're talking about in the cohesion and the nature of like what keeps us together. And I think Sebastian Junger brings in a lot of wonderful examples, whether it's, you know, the miners that get stuck in the mine and like adapt to different leadership profiles, or he talks about Civil War and Ivory Coast, like just so many really interesting examples. I think what would be really beneficial to our audience based on the Q&A we got back is to actually dive into some of these questions. And especially because a lot of these questions, Cal, they were submitted anonymously. And so I think that we could actually have a really productive conversation just between you and me. We're both combat vets. We both went to West Point together. We've been friends for, goodness, better part of 15 years now. It's kind of crazy, right? Yeah, who would have thought, right? But no, I'm excited to have this discussion with you, Cal, and go through some of these questions because I think it's going to be really great to like reflect on our relatively different yet similar experiences in the service.
I'm fired up, man. Let's do it. Yeah, there's so much to cover from the book and from our veteran experience, no doubt. Let's do it.
Absolutely, man. Well, before we get started into the questions, I mean, just curious, man. We're in our I mean, this is a very short read, a relatively easy read. I actually, you know, I try my best not to go ahead of the reading advised reading time, but you know, here we are. I'm just curious, man. What are your impressions thus far in the book, man? What's speaking to you? What's resonating with you?
Yeah, well, once again, as I said last week, thank you for picking a short book. For a guy like me, it's good to just go slow through a book. So I have been fascinated by this book. I've been wanting to read it for a while, and it captures the collective desire for all of us to have kind of a collective experience. I think at its base, I think a lot of us are lonely, frankly. A lot of us, even in this world where we're filled with comforts and most of us have everything we need, we are still longing kind of to be part of something bigger. And that's what Sebastian does in this experience, is he walks the audience through how even these tragic experiences like getting lost in a coal mine or going to war or seeing people that you know die can ultimately bring out some of the best in people, and people can actually miss that experience. And I think you and I, Rajiv, have both experienced what it's like to be part of a team, whether that's in the military or in business or being part of a family. And I think that's what this book talks about. And it gets through some of the paradoxes of that experience.
Absolutely, man. Well said. I mean, so let's, you know, I think one thing that we didn't get a chance to go into deeply, just when you and I have been on the panel before, is can you talk to me a little bit about your military experience? Like, what were your duty positions? I mean, I know you're a lawyer now for the Army, which is incredible. And then not because you're not smart enough to be a lawyer, but it's just, it's amazing how your career has gone because you started out as an infantry platoon leader.
Yeah. No, it is surprising that let's be honest, Rajiv, let's call a spade a spade, that I made it through law school. But, so I started out, you and I, we met each other at in the mess hall at West Point. And, that's always a fun story. We're just sitting there and we're both getting our breakfast. And the next thing we know, we talk for the next 2 hours about current events, and friendship sprung from there. But I branched infantry from West Point back in 2008. So I started out in going to Ranger School and then Airborne School, and then went to Hawaii, where I deployed to Iraq. And I was a platoon leader in Iraq for about 6 months, and then I was a company XO in Iraq for the final 6 months. And this was in northern Iraq. So this is the part of Iraq where Saddam used to live, and so it was a Sunni area. And it was not so, a lot of people see movies. My experience was not Restrepo. We were not in firefights every single day. But we certainly, our battalion lost people. We had a sniper in the area who was effective and who did kill people in our battalion. We did have engagements with the enemy. I saw a dead body over there and so you experience things in combat, even if it's not constant combat, that do affect you. I remember I was talking to my wife about it about 6 months ago, and kind of assuming that nothing changed when I came back. But I remember my wife saying to me, "Cal, you were a different person when you came back." And I think both you and I, Rajiv, lost a dear friend of ours, Chris Gakey, right around the time that you and I both were in combat, you in Afghanistan and me in Iraq, I believe. So, it's interesting reading this book about how difficult it can be to experience death, whether that's the enemy dying. I remember that was a very difficult experience, is literally seeing, a dead body of the enemy. It just feels very real. It's like, wow, all of a sudden that life has ended. And then also confronting the reality of people in your battalion, people in your unit who are dead. And then you and I losing a best friend. I think even though we weren't there, I think is something that I know I hadn't fully dealt with, and probably still haven't fully dealt with. But certainly it affects us.
That's interesting. I'm not sure if you knew this, but I actually high-fived Chris Gakey in Kandahar airfield. My unit was on its way out. His was on its way in. And I think there was a month or so of overlap. And, I think I did the math. In 2010, July of 2010, there were basically 4 combat brigades that were in Kandahar province. Effectively, I got that Kandahar airfield ripping out, 2 coming in, 2 going out. And when I think about that time, I think I saw something like 150 of our West Point classmates, something ridiculous, right? It was a massive amount of people that were in Kandahar airfield at the time. And Chris was one of them. I high-fived him. And then actually he died on the day I landed in Bangor, Maine, coming home. And it was this very, just sharp, stabbing reminder that a part of me is always going to be over there. And especially as we've gotten to know just Chris's story and continue to reflect on him, it's just what I think a lot of people don't understand when we talk about violence, state-sanctioned violence in a place like Iraq and Afghanistan. It's not some working professional 30, 40-year-old making sound executive decisions on the battlefield. It's a bunch of 18 and 22-year-old kids. And I think I'm just curious, man, when you think about your time there and the soldiers you led, you were so young, right? We were so young going over there. Did you feel ready when you hit the ground?
No. And I think a part of why my wife probably described me as being very different when I got back is because you get in a certain mindset. I certainly wasn't ready, or as ready as I could have been, but I was ready enough. And you do train a lot. At that point, you and I had been training for nearly probably 5-6 years, including West Point, to do that. We had been mentally preparing for that. I think one of the most striking things about the combat experience is you come home and the world continues just the way it always had. You get off the plane from combat and you realize that so many people's lives hadn't changed at all. And yet your life had changed so much. And I think that is probably one of the most difficult parts of our current combat experience. Think about some of the examples that he gives in this book about people Native Americans who would fight wars And there was the emotional experience made sense because they were fighting to keep their family alive. They were fighting because the threat was right there in front of them. And then you think of World War I and World War II, similar experiences where it was a total war. Now the war is in some distant land that we fight, and then we come back and we experience the same world that we left. It's just we've changed, and the world seems to have just remained the same.
Well said. It really did, didn't it?
What was your experience like, Rajiv? I want to hear. I don't know if I've ever even heard about your combat experience and what that was like for you coming back.
Yeah. So I mean, I was in a striker platoon leader in Kandahar, and yeah, man, it was scary. We saw more than, I mean, it's kind of hard because on one end, like conceptually, like even though we had a lot of contact with the enemy and a lot of it dangerous contact, saw several vehicles get blown up by IDs and saw a lot of folks get hurt, and unfortunately some didn't make it back. Like just by being an officer and just my placements in the in the patrol, whether it's on vehicle or on foot, like I was very safe. And it took me a while. I think my biggest hang up is that, I think part of West Point is it raises you to be someone who wants to be a part of a team. You want to be the person who carries the load and be a leader. And yet I think that when I was a platoon leader, I was like 22 years old. I was scared. I was immature. I didn't know what I was doing. I had an amazing platoon sergeant that just toughened me up and made me, honestly, he's a big reason I am the man I am today. And, what I remember is like a lot of scary moments driving late at night in really highly dangerous areas where lots of IEDs were. I remember getting trapped one night where there was it almost felt like we were in an IED minefield, and my driver and I are just like inching by, holding our breaths, trying to get out. We also had some really effective sniper fire. And then I also remember like just growing to be really close friends with my teammates. And even though there's like a rank structure and so many things to sort of regiment our behaviors, there's just lifelong bonds. And I mean, this Veterans Day, I made a concerted effort to reach out to every soldier I could that I served with and thank them for their service and just let them know that I'm here for them if there's anything I can do. Because not gonna lie, we had a rough tour. The whole company had a rough tour. There was definitely some really iconic soldiers that died, and in very graphic ways that I think just are kind of live with us, and I think me personally coming back so young and, very emotionally raw, I just wanted to kick the Army to the side. I would never have read a Sebastian Junger book, right? Like this was a part of my life I was trying to kick to the side. And so I think I'm far more well-adjusted now. And quite frankly, I think it's like friendships like yours and many of our classmates that I can just call up and just talk with and speak with and know that, I can always be open with you and tell you about what I saw or whatnot. But, it's interesting. It is definitely part of my life that I'm trying to open back up. But in many ways, I've definitely pushed it to the side.
Did you ever deliberately process it? Like, do you recall like going through a period where you're like, I really need to deal with what I saw over there, what I experienced?
There's two things. One is that I started writing for the New York Times and Time Magazine when I came back. And to me, writing about it and journaling about it, I thought I was processing it by telling it in the form of a story that was easy to digest. And what I realized actually what I was doing was I wasn't actually processing it by writing it. It wasn't actually therapeutic. What I was doing was I was almost re-architecting the narrative so that I would get to, keep the digestible parts and then like kind of throw away the rest, And it wasn't until I think January, it was about 6 months after I got back, and I'm about to move to New York City and start my new life and everything after the service or after working with this unit. And I have this like series of nightmares that keep me up at night. And it was this distinct mission where we came back to the base, and this poor girl came back, and like about a quarter of her head was just blown off. But she was fully aware and cognizant and talking, and not talking, she was a kid, but like she was just like normal, and it horrified me. It was like really disturbing. And there was something that just stuck with me. And then over a series of a couple of nights, I kept on having these like nightmares, the paralyzing nightmares that I would, like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., I would call up my girlfriend and be like, hey, I'm in a world of hurt, whatever. And I ended up going to see a therapist and seeing an Army doctor about it, who actually wasn't that helpful. In fact, my first foray was a lot of prescription drugs that the Army gave me, Ambien and something called Prezzacine to suppress my nightmares. And it turned me into a worse person. And then it wasn't until actually I got out of the Army completely and went into the VA system that I actually felt like I got the therapy I kind of needed, like the kind of counseling that was going to get me out of it. And long story short, what he helped me discover was like I really was living on an island emotionally. And I think much to the reason why what this book is talking about, right? Like you come, the Army is this like cohesive team, there's shared norms, shared values, and no matter what's going on, there's always someone that's with you by your side, and I think that presence of normalcy actually kind of, helps you get through the day. And then I think what I wasn't building for myself, particularly when I moved to Silicon Valley, was a community. Silicon Valley by default doesn't have a ton of veterans. And so it was harder for me to find people with shared experiences that I could truly feel comfortable with. And but yeah, man, talk about things
wow.
Yeah, it's been a journey. And now I'm reading books.
Did those nightmares stop eventually?
Eventually, yeah, they did. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that there was a couple bottles of Jack Daniels involved in that. Yeah, it was a bad part of time, right? And wow. It's and I know, and what's crazy, Cal, is it's not unique, right? Like I know tons of classmates that, on the pleasant end is a little bit overindulgence with alcohol, but on the worst end is, God forbid, suicide or something like that. And we've had definitely have some friends and classmates that have come close to that, or actually gone through that themselves. And it's the scars from war definitely outlast the conflict. And over a 20-year conflict, I mean, the scars are going to last a lot longer. So
yeah, I thought it was interesting in the book where it distinguished between rape victims and soldiers. That was interesting, especially now that I work so closely with a lot of rape victims as a prosecutor. The distinction that he made, for those that haven't read the book, is that rape victims, for them, they associate that entire experience typically as a negative experience. And so for them, not normally, but often they react differently than combat veterans or people who have experienced trauma in combat. Whereas for those that have experienced combat, there are often a lot of positive experiences that they don't want to suppress. And so it's this more nuanced experience for them where they experience trauma, where they're trying to suppress certain incidents or deal with that trauma, but they want to keep a lot of the good. And so it's an interesting way that I just hadn't thought about how that might be different.
You hit it on the head, man. And because at the one end of all that trauma and all, I mean, and what's interesting is like the life of a combat veteran and a life of a combat soldier on the ground in Afghanistan or in Iraq, it's like 85% of your time there is boredom, right? Like, it's not like there's bullets flying all the time, right? Yeah. It's like these concentrated moments of highly dangerous kinetic activity, and then it's nothing. And so it's crazy, right? Because even though, like, let's say I probably could count on my fingers and toes the number of times I actually engaged with the enemy or was engaged by the enemy in violence, but like, I was there for, the better part of a year, over a year. And so it's just crazy to think like those, like 10% of it can define let's say 60% of it, but of the memory. But you're right, the bonds that we build with those soldiers, even, say what you will about the conflict nationally in Afghanistan and Iraq, you and I probably both had experiences with local nationals where we were able to provide just a little bit of support just to make their lives a little bit easier and do good by them. But yeah, man, it's a struggle, right? Because on one end, we may be proud of what we did as individuals. We may feel differently about the conflict at large. It's just it's a cocktail of emotions.
Yeah, and it almost sounds like to me, and don't let me get this wrong, but it sounds like maybe when you got back, you just wanted to suppress the whole thing, or you just wanted to push the entire army to the side, which I imagine of those positive experiences you had, that would include that as well.
What's interesting is I definitely wanted to push the army to the side, but I would argue that I had more of an issue with the institution of the army than I did with any. I think the violence itself is scarring, but what really drove me to anger was this feeling that the institution of the army was simply just way too powerful and yet way too ill prepared to do nation building in the Middle East. It struck me as like when I recall my training at the JRTC, the Joint Readiness Training Center, or NTC actually, the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, and then JRTC is at Fort Polk, one of the two sites that brigades go to before they go to Iraq or Afghanistan. I remember being very surprised at just how little emphasis was placed on like cultural training, how little emphasis was actually placed on language, on not just showing respect or like simple things like don't show your feet, but why? Why is this important? I didn't really learn anything about democracy, right? If we're there to go build a democracy, isn't it important for some of the leaders in these villages to know and to aspire, help the villagers aspire to a democratic way of life? No, you know what I learned how to do is I learned how to run a really sick raid and do IED and route clearance, right? Like that's how I spent my NTC time, which was very valuable. I needed to learn how to, be confident with, enemy engagements and confident when I see a potential improvised explosive device. But that's not what we were there for. And it just like, come on, like even 22-year-old Rajiv was like, this doesn't seem like we're gonna get anywhere. Like, I mean, you probably went to JRTC or NTC yourself, right?
I did, yeah. But I think you had also been. I mean, you'd been to Egypt. You had studied Arabic. You were an international relations major. I mean, you were not processing this like the typical platoon leader, too.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, most platoon leaders don't speak Arabic. So.
Well, now I kind of wish I had like majored in, I don't know, math or something like normal. So.
But it is. I think you do bring up an interesting point because I think just as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this a little bit of. I think one of the challenges with the current structure is you can't necessarily see the impact, right? Like whereas if you were fighting as described in this book, like an American Indians, they see whether they're winning or losing right there in front of them. And they see whether they get to go home and be with their family or not. For us, we see soldiers not coming home, but we maybe only see like an incremental gain, or even worse, we don't see any gain. By the time we leave, we're worse off than it feels like we're worse off than when we got there. So I think it sounds like to me you're kind of articulating maybe a frustration of like, I see the downside to this. I think people are dying, but I also don't feel like the mission is moving forward in a way that I would like it to be.
Yeah, well, my answer to that is like, I think the biggest frustrating thing is that we have not been in Afghanistan, for 20 years. We've been in Afghanistan 1 year, 20 times, right? And so what that means is that like every time a unit rotates out, what ends up happening is like that new unit that comes in has to relearn everything, right? And they're starting from scratch in that part of the country. And so what that means for platoon leader, like I came and I was super green. I had no knowledge of what was going on, and I restarted, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing until probably month 6 or 7. And then you're basically packing up, towards the end. And so what's interesting is that if this were truly foundational to American national security, don't bring me home. Let me go and win the war until we're safe, And that's, I think, the biggest frustrating thing is I feel like we've had this, sort of rotations for 20 years in and out of this country, particularly in Afghanistan, with very minimal, with trillions of dollars spent, very minimal gains in actual national security. To me, what it tells me is that all those lives that were lost and all the time I spent over there, it just wasn't mission critical. It wasn't actually keeping us any safer. It was theater almost. And that I think is the most frustrating part, to be honest, and what gives me a lot of anger. And it's hard to I think the average American has troubles differentiating. Like, we just figured out as a country how to thank the veteran without necessarily believing in the cause. Now, is it possible to hear the veteran's story, understand their loyalty and love of the soldiers and platoon leaders and the platoon mates that they served with, but also understand the fact that they walked away from the Army highly disgruntled and frustrated with the institution? Can we separate that kind of local versus systemic trauma, effectively, that and experience that comes, whether it's localized to the platoon or systemic with the institution and what it represents? Those are some of the challenges I think that are coming up for our next generation of veterans. Does that mean anything to you? Like, you're still in, right? Like, I don't even know if you're getting all red and nervous, like you're gonna get in trouble.
What is Rajiv saying?
What is Rajiv saying?
Who is this? No, what I thought there at the end is you have you're in such a great position to critique the military. I think we need people who have served to critique their experience, and I don't think that speaks. I think we have to be able to separate the fact that you love this country just as much as anyone, but you also are voicing concerns about your experience and what you see, our current strategic plan or whatever, however you would describe that. And I think those are completely consistent. You can both love this country, love and be proud of your service, but also want to offer ways to get better. I think if anything, you have an investment that other people don't have. And so I think all of those are valid and justifiable. So, and your mom just asked a question, by the way, so we better get to that.
Oh, we actually have a couple questions that we got to get to. So, well, first, number one, my mom always goes first, right? She and Judy Bello are like my most loyal fans. They always deliver. All right,
hey, Mom.
Hey, Mom. What can companies do in hiring veterans like yourselves to help them acclimate to the new culture and responsibilities? This is a tough one.
That's all you, Rajiv.
Yeah, and Cal, one day you're gonna leave the service, and this is gonna be good advice. So I hope you're taking notes.
Hopefully, you'll hire me.
Yeah, right. Hopefully, I'll be working for you. What I would say is this: I would say that one, and I think I mentioned this last time, it's like when you're going to a company, you're actually raising your hand and asking to be a member of their tribe, right? And so I think it's actually really on the veteran. The majority of the burden, actually, I certainly do believe, is actually on the veteran to assimilate and to learn and ask questions about the business, its mission, its values, its goals, its struggles, its competition, its market, its customers, etc. And I think that that's not 80 to 90% of the value is that veteran preparing to join a new tribe. So what can companies do to acclimate those veterans into the tribe? First and foremost is, I think the biggest struggle that I see is the kind of disposition to typecast a veteran as someone who's hyper regimented, really organized, but very much an outsider to the market and to the customer and all this other stuff. And as a result, I see a lot of high flying, very exciting, dynamic, frontline leaders get relegated to sort of back office operations type roles in Silicon Valley and corporate America, et cetera, where they're keeping the trains running on time. And my big thing is that, like, hey, if that person was on the front lines of America's global war on terror, put them on the front lines of corporate America. Put that person in front of a customer. At the end of the day, the veteran is a leader. They know how to lead in stressful times. So what are the positions in a company that actually require that kind of like fierce leadership? I guarantee you they ain't in a back office, right? It's in front of the customer, leading a customer to charge a hill, right? And giving them the confidence to take a new pathway and adopting a new set of products or adopting a new framework to solve a problem. Leading, whether it's, whatever the function is. I think the key is to recognize that veteran's talent is actually very transferable to a lot of the mission critical functions in a company. And so, to distill that, it's don't typecast them into a back office operations, keep the trains running on time kind of role. Put that, make sure that veteran is getting sought after for functions where they may not have any experience, but that leadership and that adaptability will get the technical expertise in their heads relatively quickly, and they'll have that leadership acumen and the maturity to go and execute. And the biggest example I can give is my very first real boss in a real company was a guy named Steve Goman. And at the time I had done the Army thing. I'd fiddled around in startups. I was, like I said, I was writing for Time Magazine, New York Times. I looked like a confusing mess on a resume. But he just got me on the phone and just said, yeah, this guy's smart. He's hungry. He'll figure it out. He's going to take initiative. And sure enough, he took a chance on me. And now I have like this very successful sales career in technology. And it all started because someone took a shot at me because they saw my ability to take initiative. So that's where I would say a private sector is like, take a shot at the veteran. Not a literal shot. They've had that part, but take a shot on the veteran. Excuse me. I'm going to move on.
Rajiv, one thing that makes me, do you think that most people have trouble finding that same level of camaraderie in the private sector? Because the book talked about how, in addition to all the destruction and loss of life that war inspires, it also inspires courage, loyalty, selflessness. They can often be intoxicating. And I'm just curious, like in the private sector, do you feel like maybe it's hard to replicate maybe what you experienced in the military?
It's damn near impossible.
Yeah.
And it should be impossible. There is no mission in the private sector that even competes closely with the importance and the consequences of a military operation, right? Like, people's lives are on the line. I mean, there's no sales target that has the same gravity as a military operation. And so, that being said, I think I have been very impressed and blown away by the quality of teamwork in the private sector, because at the end of the day, unlike the military, the company's got a bottom line. They've got investors. They've got very direct and immediate accountability that I don't believe our current armed forces do. Yeah, it's the nature of government, right? It's the nature of bureaucracy, is that in these types of institutions, is that accountability of a government institution is very difficult. Whereas in the private sector, there's at least one metric, and it's called the bottom line, and it's either there or it's not, right? And there's no, I think that the precision of goals in the private sector leads to really precise teamwork and precise decision making at a very local and tactical level. That, of course, builds up into these big, very successful, high margin and profitable companies. Whereas, in the Army, it's like a stable and democratic Afghanistan is a very subjective and it's a very tough thing to measure. And I don't think that we did a good job measuring it year by year, month by month, quarter by quarter. And as a result, I mean, and sure enough, we haven't been measuring it because 20 years later, nothing's changed. So yeah, there's very little accountability that is there in the private sector that I did not find there in the public sector.
Yeah, and the book talks about too how often in the military there's this collective desire to succeed, right? So it's not just about individual achievement, it's about collective achievement, which means putting your ego to the side, and also requires trust. Do you find that to be present too in the private sector, where at least your experience, where people are not as ego driven, but they're willing to kind of collectively pursue a team goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's really hard because, trust is something that I think is very relative to a situation, right? Because there's obviously there's someone's intention to do good by their partner and to follow through, but then there's their ability and their capacity to do so, right? Like, Cal, I'll trust you any day to have my back in a firefight. We're both West Point military trained guys. I trust you all day long. But do I trust you to, I don't know, go, I don't know, do something that you're not really trained to do, right? It would be on your sales team. Be on my sales team. I don't know. Maybe you'd probably crush it though. I'm sure you'd do amazing. But my point is simply that, the level of trust, I think, in a very skills-based function, whether quite frankly in the military or in the private sector, is not just your intention, but also your capacity. And one thing I noticed is that, the Army, to its credit, is very cookie cutter, very defined in what it means when they say you are trained, you are qualified. Whereas in the private sector, to be a salesperson or a partnerships person or a marketing person or something like that in one company can mean something very different in another. And so I find that is actually where, I've had to sort of grow up and be more discerning of like how people's prior experiences will apply and affect their trajectories. And it's actually a really exciting exercise, right? Because you never, like I work with colleagues that have worked at everything from, like, I work at LinkedIn now. I have colleagues that worked at HP. I have colleagues that worked at Tiffany's Diamonds. I have colleagues that have worked in all sorts of different companies, and they all bring something really exciting to the table. And so just level setting on that diversity of private sector experience, I think, is actually, it helps actually build trust when you don't come in with assumptions. And that's something that I've had to learn. So Cal, we actually got a few awesome questions coming in, both on the anonymous chat and in the YouTube chat. So let's go through this. First and foremost, I want to go through. Great. Thank you for your service is something that I say habitually every Veterans Day. This past Veterans Day, I didn't know what to say because. This past Veterans Day, I didn't know what to say because I felt like I was the statement was getting old. What is the appropriate thing to say to those who have served our country on Veterans Day in a way that shows that we're not just taking them for granted? Boom. I think that's a really interesting question. Cal, what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. It's very insightful. I think just asking questions, getting to know people, learning about their experience really means a lot. Asking people like, well, thank you for your service. Can you tell me about what that's been like for you and your family? Because I do think sometimes serving can feel, even though you're part of a team, it can sometimes feel lonely when people don't really understand what that life is like. And for example, my family and I move around a lot. We just moved twice in the last 12 months. And that can be tough. That can be really hard. So you're pulling yourself from a community, you're putting yourself into a new community, you're meeting people, but they're already established in their own community. So I think just simply asking questions to get to know someone will make a veteran feel special. And I think you'll have a better understanding of what service is like for that person.
I think it's extremely well said, Cal. Thank you for doing that. Judy Bello, you also ask, does the military prepare you as you exit active service by coaching soldiers for interviews in the private sector? I don't know about you, Cal, and I know you've probably seen lots of your soldiers leave the service. I think this is, so number one, yes, there are actually lots of resources given to those leaving the service, both in the scope of vocational and rehabilitative training, just general resume preparation, job seeking preparation. They actually now offer you the opportunity to serve in the private sector while still on active duty as sort of like a an internship, if you will. And it's actually phenomenal. I think the Army and the military in general has done some really great things. But I think one of the challenges I notice is that when we say veteran, in that giant category are the 18-year-old or 20-year-old infantryman, 11 Bravo, who's done one tour, enlisted for 3 to 4 years, coming out, doesn't have a college degree, doesn't want to go to college, or has different ideas in mind for their career. You're also then including the Cal Walters of the world, who went to West Point, has a law degree, probably has a lot of opportunities out in the private sector if he really wants it. You're including the staff sergeant that was an intelligence non-commissioned officer with a top secret clearance and maybe highly sought after by the Defense Industrial Base. You have folks with so many different levels of seniority, backgrounds, and credentials that it's hard to put them all into one pot and say, here, let's help them get a job. And that's, I think, the way that for the majority of modern history, that's the way we've been addressing the military. And when you put all of these folks back into one pot, the pot ends up kind of defaulting to the lowest common denominator, which tends to be that 18 to 20-year-old who enlisted into a combat arms branch in conventional forces, doesn't have a college education. What do you do with that person? And to be honest, that the training and resources we give to that soldier, while very valuable to that soldier, is not really valuable for the Rajivs and the Cals and the other types of folks out there who are coming out with different needs. Cal, how does that resonate with you at all?
It does. Yeah, I think it shows just how different. Yeah, it's easy to categorize us all as just this one soldier, but everyone's needs are different. Everyone's aspirations are different. Everyone's education level and opportunities are going to be different. I've seen a lot of soldiers complain who are junior enlisted or maybe haven't completely finished college, complain that there's not enough for them, helping them transition. It's those folks who are going to go get an Ivy League MBA and be fine, that they're like, well, those guys are fine, but what are we doing for me? One thing I've noticed, to give a shout out to LinkedIn, is that LinkedIn is a really great free platform that I've just noticed a lot of veterans who have already transitioned are sharing their experience on there free. They do webinars, they talk about the different programs, they give immediate feedback to these military programs, and if there's issues, they have connections with the people that run them. So if you're a veteran and you're listening to this, or if you're active duty, highly recommend you get a LinkedIn profile and try to connect with as many people as you can. And there's certain people that you should follow who I think do a great job of helping people get ready. And I haven't transitioned, but I do think it's smart to get active well before you're ready to transition. I've heard many people say that, you don't want to wait till it's right your time to transition and then say, oh man, what should I do now? Build the network early.
So Cal, I'd love to double click on that with you, man. Like I know you're not anywhere. I know you owe the Army a lot of time. Let's be honest here. That law school, it's how many more years you got to serve for your minimum commitment?
Well, actually, I'm like a couple more years, and then I could transition. But I have no plans to leave anytime soon. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing.
Good for you, man. That's excellent to hear. We keep on introducing you as the Chief of Justice for the 82nd Airborne, sometimes the Chief Justice, whatever title we're giving you.
My mom likes to say that.
Tell everybody a little bit about that, man. Like, that job is legit. Like, I cannot emphasize how big of a deal this is. Like, tell a little bit about what you do, man.
You're definitely overplaying it, man. I mean, I do love my job, and it's really an honor to do it. I have a team of prosecutors. So in the military, we prosecute soldiers. We have jurisdiction over soldiers wherever they commit crimes or alleged crimes, and we have the ability to prosecute any range of crimes, from murder all the way to military specific crimes like disrespect or going AWOL. And so prosecutors in the military have to do it correctly, obviously. And if you showed up at one of my court martials, it would look just like any other federal trial you've seen. It's very professional, very formal. I actually had no idea this was even happening, Rajiv, when I was an infantry officer. And so what I do now is I manage a group of attorneys, a handful of attorneys whose job is to prosecute cases and prepare cases for trial. And it's really important work. And the commanders actually are the ones who decide whether a case forward to trial. And they get to charge soldiers based on the evidence that they review with crimes. And we advise them about that. So a soldier will literally walk into a commander's office after the commander's reviewed the evidence and will say, you are being charged with felony offenses. And then that starts the process where there's kind of a grand jury type proceeding that happens, and then it goes up to the commanding general, and then the commanding general sends it to the court, and then a military judge takes the case, and a jury is put together of actual active duty service members who are part of that unit, and they sit and they listen to us present the case, and they get an opportunity to have a defense counsel, and then they ultimately decide whether that person's guilty or not, and then they sentence that person. So it's pretty busy. And the unit I work in is, we have 17,000 soldiers, so it's a busy job.
That's incredible, man. I'm super proud of you, dude. It's like being a partner at a law firm at age 35, like unreal, man. We got a couple more questions that came in from the anonymous chat. Do you mind if I throw some at you, see what you say?
No, let's do it.
All right. This one says, the U.S. military has spent 19 years at war in the global war on terror. We have spent trillions of dollars, and I'm not really sure what we have to show for it. How do we hold our military accountable for, quote unquote, winning our wars? Are these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan actually winnable in the first place? It's a lot there. And I think that person is asking a very wise question. I mean, Cal, you've been, you're not only in the service now, you've already served in Iraq, but hell, you might get a call tomorrow to go to Afghanistan or to Iraq again, right? Like you may get called to go to any place in the world. Like, how do you wrap your head around the idea I think it comes back to the word again, accountability. Like we are actually winning a war. Does that question, how would you respond to that if you were?
I think that's a really great question. And I think people should be asking that question. One of the things that's unique about our military is it's led by civilians, and the civilians, the military doesn't make the policy. They don't make the decision on whether or not to go to war or not. It's the executives and with the consent of Congress. So really, and that's one of the interesting things about our current structures. You have a very small percentage of the population who's actively serving and who go and fight the wars. And then you have the rest of the population who's responsible for figuring out whether those are the right wars to go to, including those, that small population of military folks who vote. I mean, we all vote. We should vote. We don't have to vote, but we should. And so I've often said that, like, it's interesting to go and fight wars, but really have no say. You have a very minor say on whether or not that's a war that should be fought. And so we really do rely on the civilian population to make the right decisions. Now, whether or not this is a war that we should be in, I mean, I do think it's, when you look at whether or not we've had any terrorist attack on our homeland in the past 19 years, I think there's some truth to the fact that we've been over there fighting this war on that territory. And I also trust, I know some of the people that are at the Pentagon. I know the quality of leaders that the military has. And I do believe that, and we are not privy to a lot of the information that they have, but I know that they care very deeply about the people that they're putting in harm's way. And so I can only imagine that they think that we need to be over there, and that it's based on very legitimate evidence of what it would be like if we weren't over there. I mean, one of the challenges that we're facing is it's hard to prove a negative, right? It's hard to prove what would have happened if we hadn't been over there. We will never know. But we do know that over the past 19 years, we have not had a terrorist attack in the United States, which is certainly good for all of us.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for that, Cal. I think it's also really interesting. It's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove the presence without, but I think in the absence of achieving defined objectives, right? If the if the quote unquote standard for success is it could have been worse, then I'm not sure. I think what really comes to my mind is like, if the defined objective is a, you know, democratic and stable Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, did you feel like a proportional level of authority and power given to, say, the State Department or to other departments in the government that probably had more institutional knowledge of how to achieve such an end state? I'm not even like, I honestly, like, I think I saw a handful of USAID people, United States, it's our international development funds. But other than that, it was basically, you know, democracy by a military unit, which I think is kind of hilarious now that I look back on it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the things that you and I were doing as platoon leaders in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had no idea that I would be meeting with a local mayor, or meeting with a police chief, or meeting with an Iraqi army leader, and helping them train their force, or helping them think through infrastructure. And I mean, it is, at least back then, and I don't know if it's still current, but the things that the Department of Defense were doing certainly goes outside of doing raids and reacting to contact like we were kind of trained to do.
Absolutely. You know, we just had a question come in from Mahi Gunturu. The industry is trying to bridge the gap by having more women in leadership roles. What kind of an edge do women with military experience have, I assume, in the private sector? I think it's a really interesting question. You know, and we had Melissa Boatwright on last week, and I've got a ton of friends from the military who are women now transitioning to the private sector. And, you know, I gotta say, there's a level of toughness, I think, that comes with being a woman in a male-dominated industry like the military and the armed services, like, and especially when there are a lot of emotions and like there's a lot of aggression in military culture. And even though the vast majority of soldiers that I served with are some of the best people, best Americans, truly, you know, men and women of honor and integrity, they're absolutely bad apples. And in some of these isolated environments, and some of these environments where very young, inexperienced people are put in charge, unfortunately, bad things happen. And I think both Cal and I, we both know women who've unfortunately had to play defense. And I mean, do you remember last week when Melissa, she said you knew the women that, you know, one among the first things when women would introduce each other in the unit, they would say, "Hey, this is the guy you got to watch out for. That guy's okay." But like, that broke my heart, right?
Yeah, me too.
And, you know, not to say that like corporate America is like so much better than that, but like that, you know, if you can go through that in the military environment, stay in an institution that is basically designed, whether it's by physical fitness standards or the uniform standards, it's like it was designed for men, right? And you can go through that organization and succeed, and then pop out into the private sector. To me, the women I know who have served, they are resilient, they have grit, they are tough as nails, they can adapt. And what I really love in some of the women that I've seen is that they still are exceptionally empathetic and like are just big-hearted leaders. And so, I would say that about pretty much every women that I've served with that I now get to interact with in the private sector. Like, they're some of the best people I know. So I do believe they have an advantage. Cal, curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the best leaders I've had in the military have been women. So I can't. I mean, amazing leadership qualities. When I do a podcast on leadership, and when I originally reflected on some of the best leaders I'd seen, they were women. They just demonstrated a level of empathy and care and organization and grit, as you described. I mean, so I have had incredible, and my wife is an incredible leader, and certainly someone that I look up to. So I haven't been in the private sector, but I can imagine that those leadership traits transfer well.
And they absolutely do, Cal. I 100% agree with it. So listen, we're going to close ourselves out here. We'll take one more question. Actually, Gita, I'm going to save this question for next time because I'm very excited to introduce. Next time, we're actually going to be streaming a discussion with myself and author Eric Edstrom. He's the author of the book Un-American, A Soldier's Reckoning of America's Longest War. I just posted the YouTube landing page there. We're going to do that next week. Eric is a West Point graduate as well. He was 07, a year ahead of Cal and I. And he deployed actually to the exact same area where I deployed just a year earlier. And my unit actually switched out with his. And he has done an amazing job chronicling, I think, the social, political, and really moral struggles that a platoon leader who is, aware of the world and what's going on has when they come back from theater. And I think his book is going to be a really interesting discussion point. So I think he would probably be better to answer that question. But to sign us off, Cal, I think I would really love to just hear from your perspective. This is something that I think I really don't know how to wrap my head around, which is, why do you do what you do, man? Like, you've with everything going on in the world, with leadership that sometimes feels like it's off the handle, with a military that doesn't really have a lot of civilian folks holding it accountable. Like, how do you, what makes you a committed, dedicated servant of the nation? Where is that motivation coming from? I think that's something that a lot of our folks want to hear and need to hear.
Man, well, for me, the book talks about how much joy you receive when you serve, when you are part of something bigger than yourself. And I think certainly we're going through a difficult time right now in our country. And but I think about the history of our country and the shoulders that I stand on, and you have stood on, the people that have given their lives for this military and this country and this kind of democracy, or this experiment of America. And so certainly I have my tough days. I have my days where I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting my family through this? Why are we moving again? Why am I living with this uncertainty? But I think about also those days where I just love being a part of something so special, where I am proud of the reaction I see from my mom and dad as I just see their pride in serving. And I think one day I'm going to, hopefully talk to my grandkids about what it meant to be part of something bigger. It doesn't have to be the military, but I think any of us can serve. I was talking to someone I admire a lot, General retired Caslin, the other day. He's the current president of the University of South Carolina. And I asked him this question: why do you serve, sir? Why do you serve even now? He served 43 years in the Army. And then now
wasn't he at one point the oldest member of the armed forces?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so.
Incredible.
Yeah. Unreal.
He was going to serve 5 years and he served 43. He was the oldest member of his class to get out. And his response to that was to talk about a story in the Bible where Jesus talks about the greatest among you is the servant among you. And I truly believe that. And so for me, it's not always a journey and never easy. And there's certainly days where I doubt if what I'm doing makes the most sense, but I kind of come back to that idea of service too.
Well, I tell you what, you certainly are among the greatest among us, Cal, for sure. Always loved our friendship, and I'm just so grateful that you came and had this discussion with me, man. This was really wonderful to hear your thoughts on, as we celebrate Veterans Day. And thank you very much for your service, man.
Me too. And I want to tell you, Rajiv, I'd never heard your story of combat and kind of you coming back and dealing with that. And I just am so thankful that you're willing to share that with me and with really, I guess, the world who's tuning in here, anyone that wants to listen. But I think what that does is it normalizes the experience for so many people, that it's okay to go and get help. And that actually is a brave thing to do. And I think for any veteran out there who's maybe struggling with that experience, you're not alone. We love you, and it's okay to go and get help. And we all need it.
100%. Hey, Cal, thanks again, man. And to all of our 99-page viewers out there, we really appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next week for Eric Edstrom, author of Un-American. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.